So we finished our summary of some of the common methods you'll run across that are intermediate operations in Java streams. And now we're going to turn our attention to the terminal operations. And we'll start by just giving an overview of what terminal operations are and the important role they play in the life of a stream. Note that these operations we're going to discuss apply to both sequential and parallel streams. Their behavior is logically the same, but of course the performance can differ depending on how you use them and what your characteristics of your stream are and other things we'll talk about in detail later. We're going to continue to showcase the Hamlet program here as a running case study to illustrate how these various terminal operations behave. So every stream finishes with a terminal operation that usually, not always, but usually yields a non-stream result. There's one very unusual kind of exception to this that we just saw actually in our previous program where we had reduce return a stream. But that was kind of unusual. And so I've used that as a special case. So here's a simple example of a terminal operation that does not yield a stream result. This is the for each terminal operation, which has a side effect, which is to do whatever the consumer method reference passed to it instructs it to do. In this particular case, it's to print the results out. Remember, there's only one terminal operation per stream, and you have to have one. Some terminal operations don't return any values at all. So the for each operation we just looked at is an example. There's also another one called for each ordered. We'll talk about that later. These operations only have side effects, which is kind of funny because most of the time we frown upon side effects. But here's like the one, almost the one and only case, no, not the only case, but one of the main cases where you have side effect related operations in streams. Here's a simple example. We're going to take the characters in the play Hamlet, extract out only those who, or filter out those that don't start with H, capitalize them, sort them, and then we're going to print them out. So that's a very simple example. There's other operations that are the results of so-called reduction operations. And these include collect and reduce. And we're going to spend a lot of time, especially on collect, because that's the most common terminal operation that is useful in practice. And again, collect and reduce work seamlessly with parallel streams. There's all kinds of subtleties we'll talk about later in the course, and they're really cool. But just be aware that everything I'm telling you here is applicable for your next programming assignment as well as the one you did earlier. And then there's also a bunch of streams, terminal operations, that yield optional or Boolean values. So things like find any, find first, none match, all match. You've seen some of those. You've used some of those in your first programming assignment. I just showed you an example of all match. And they are interesting. And many of these are short-circuiting operations as well. They will stop once a condition is either true or false, depending on what they're trying to do. A terminal operation also has the effect of triggering the intermediate operations. Remember, streams are lazy, so nothing starts until the terminal operation is reached. And you'll understand a little bit more about that when we look at the implementation, which will come later. That's just a very quick overview of terminal operations. There's a lot to be said about them, and we're going to go through some of them, and then we'll look at some other implementation details later in the course.